Hello, my name is Erwin Escobar, and I'm here because I am presenting my speech on apologetics and the answer of Christianity to religious pluralism. The title of my paper is Jesus Christ and Him Crucified. This comes from the passage where Paul writes to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 1 and 5. Ministry in the 21st century entails the responsibility of presenting the message of the gospel in a way that is relevant to the culture. Christian leaders must be aware that there has been a cultural change that has dramatically impacted everything we do, from church services to communication, worship, evangelism, missions trips, and more. In addition to the message, the preacher must be able to address the challenges of the era. The most important challenge we face today is postmodern thought. Postmodern thought, according to social scientists, is rooted in the idea of relativism. Social scientists have identified postmodern thought as a trend in modern Western culture founded on the idea of relativism. Relativism rejects everything that presents itself as absolute. Religious pluralism is part of relativism. This has opened the door for multitudes of people to bring into question the values and beliefs that have been considered true and real over the past 2 centuries in the Western world, including the Christian faith. The Apostle Paul reminds us in 1 Corinthians 2, verses 1 through 5, that it is only by knowing Jesus Christ and Him crucified that we can effectively preach the gospel. This brings us back into focus about the essence of our message, which should be Christ and His sacrifice, as opposed to motivational, worldly, and extra-biblical teachings that are part of more modern church doctrine today. Christian leaders can only address the challenges of postmodern thought by going back to the essence of our message, just like Paul did. So the question is, what is the essence of postmodern thought? Well, the essence is relativism. Relativism is a worldview that denies the existence of absolute truth. Relativism considers all sources of truth to be relative to a person's experience. Relativism rejects absolute truth while accepting everything else. Relativism considers that no opinions should be considered bad, wrong, or evil except for radical ones. Relativism considers pluralism the best way to live. The message of Christ in the postmodern age, therefore, must confront the issues or the challenges presented by relativism. The message of Christ, we must remember, is consistent. It means it's the same as it always been. Just like Paul said, the message is Jesus Christ and Him crucified. The message of Christ is uncompromising, while the packaging, meaning the way we present the message, has changed or may change. The message itself remains the same. Paul reminds us the message is Christ and Him crucified. Paul reminds us we should not accommodate the message or dilute it with worldly wisdom just to appeal to a few people or to appeal to the majority. This is what Paul says. He said, I didn't come to you with words of worldly wisdom, but just by knowing Christ and Him crucified. So that's the apologetic approach I am taking to the challenge of religious pluralism. Now, Paul reminds us we should not accommodate the message. The message of Christ is absolute truth, and the message of Christ is indeed radical. The church can reach out to the world more effectively by spreading the message of Christ and presenting it as it is, absolute truth. The gospel is absolute truth. Although some may get offended, the gospel of Christ is absolute and radical. All people, as Paul points out to the Greeks, seek absolute truth, and this is in Acts 17, verses 16 through 34. Presenting the whole gospel, according to McGrath, is essential in order to counter any arguments that may raise up against it. In other words, From an apologetic standpoint, it is more effective to present the whole gospel, meaning the radical gospel, as opposed to presenting parts of the gospel to look like we're being friendly to the world or we're being ashamed of our faith. This means that presenting the gospel in a radical way, in a way that doesn't show like we are apologizing for it, is like shedding light over darkness. Now, although this is important, we must also understand that apologetics teaches us that we should find points of contact. In other words, we should find ways to connect to the culture we're trying to reach with the gospel. So finding points of contact is important. Although this is a fight between absolute truth and relativism, the Christian leader must always seek to find common ground to get the message across. This entails getting to know in depth the culture that surrounds us, preparing ourselves to build strong arguments in favor of our faith, and preparing to explain how believing in Jesus and Him crucified as the only source of hope and salvation. And we must remember, this is not hate speech. Most people will say that if we are radicalized in our faith, we are being hateful. We are not. We're actually presenting people and the world with the love of Christ, with the uncompromising, absolute truth of the Word of God, which comes from knowing Christ and Him crucified. So Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." He said this in John 14, verse 6. This means that accepting Christ is rejecting religious pluralism. Relativism embraces religious pluralism and therefore clashes with Christian thought. Only by standing on the truth while at the same time studying our culture and finding points of contact will the message continue to be spread throughout the world. All people are searching for one absolute truth, whether they acknowledge it or not. Therefore, it is the job of the church to go back to being radical about presenting the gospel, just like Paul did, by knowing Jesus Christ and Him crucified, not with wisdom of the world or persuasive words, but knowing Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Thank you very much, and God bless you.